just some images. How do we imagine the soul? How do we kind of imagine this reincarnation today? Well, one of my favorites is what happens in trees. We are eating time. The more time we eat, the more soul weight we put on. And the trees do that. They just kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger. And we have other images. Nature does all these things.
Chris, can you use the mic?
Sorry, thank you. We have these suggestive natural phenomena where nature just kind of builds and builds and spirals on. But my favorite images are imagining the soul for flowers. And so when I'm with my students, I ask them to imagine that each one of those petals and each one of those pistils and stamens is an entire life. So each one of those petals is 100 years. Each one of those little thousands of stamen in the center is 100 years of life. And the soul is the beautiful, magnificent integration of all of that experience into an identity that is bigger than any one, but which honors everyone. And just as there are many, many different types of flowers, we're not all becoming the same thing. Actually, we're becoming more and more different, more and more individualized. We're cutting ourselves, we're developing ourselves in different directions with different aptitudes. But we have to do something to imagine the soul that we are underneath, something large, something magnificent, and something beautiful. Many of you have seen Carl Jung's mandalas and these beautiful images that he would draw. Those, to me, in some ways, are like images of the soul. They're not just images of a state of mind at the present, but they're images of this deeper identity that's moving through. So, you ready to go to the next topic? Yes.
I have one very basic question. Where are all the, like, as the population increases?
Where are they coming from?
Yes.
I had that same question.
Good. I answer all of these questions in life cycles because I wrote life cycles after I've been teaching this stuff for 10 years, and the students pretty much asked every question that you could possibly imagine. I try to, give the answers there. Here's the way of thinking of it. The problem of the growth of the human species and where those souls are coming from is only a problem if we make two assumptions. One is that the number of souls is limited, it's finite, and that they're really very small. So in the beginning, there were maybe 60,000 human beings on the planet. If we assume that there were only 60,000 souls, and somehow we must be dividing them or doing something to get 7 billion souls. But here's a different way of thinking. My university was at one time, we had about 3,000 students. 50 years later, we have 13,000 students. If you never left campus, you saw the students coming and going semester by semester, and you would see that there are more and more students, you might be asking yourself, where are they coming from? But of course they're coming from the surrounding area because it's just a much, much bigger community than our campus. Likewise, we have no reason to think that there are only a small number of souls. There could be trillions and trillions of souls. There could be souls lined up waiting to get into the classroom that we're in right now. They cannot get on this planet until there is space available for them to get in. So every semester, there are some new freshmen and there are some graduating seniors. There's a matriculation. There's some humans who are leaving and some humans who are coming. But there are always more souls available and who are eager to be part of this exercise. Robert Monroe, who I talk about in Dark Night, Early Dawn, my book, second book, and we're not going to talk too much about it today, but he's an interesting man. Went out of his body when he was 40 years old, traveled over the universe, and wrote 3 books, autobiographical books, describing what the world looks like from someone who's been exploring it in the out-of-body state. He says, every one of us is here because somewhere in our travels in the spiritual, non-physical world, we came across a graduate of the Earth School. Somebody who had gone through this curriculum. And we were so blown away by the beauty and the quality of their energy that we tracked down how they got that way. And we tracked them down to here, and we began the incarnational process so that we could become like what we saw. So, massive population. He says the majority of intelligent life in the universe is non-physical. The majority is non-physical. Do you have a question? Is there a hand up here? Yes.
Yeah, I was born with 3 pounds, 3 ounces, and I was wondering, would there be any reason, because I always said, well, smoky, my mother liked it, that smoky environment, like I feel like, oh, I'm getting out of here, in the 7th month kind of thing, but any reason why somebody would be born so premature and low birth weight?
I don't know of any kind of formula that kind of gives us that. I think reincarnation, of course, this doesn't answer all our questions. It just gives us a new context within which we can explore answers. And once we get into the past lives therapy, where we have a context in which people have asked that question: why am I this way? Why was I born with this particular set of circumstances? And what we find is, when you actually go into the details of their memory, when you can help them remember the choices that they made before they were incarnated, there are reasons. There are reasons for everything. What that particular reason is behind that particular thing, I don't know. But we have a context in which we can explore.
Yeah, I just figured I'd ask because you've done so much reading. I thought maybe that would have come up.
Yeah.
Okay.
All the various conditions. Why am I born this way? Why am I in this family? Why am I in this context? Why did I lose my legs in this accident? Why? There is a deeper context, but we have to get into the soul in order to retrieve the memories that give us the information we need.
You're like, I'm like, why me? Why do I get these 2 older brothers?
Yeah, why am I this lucky? First here and then here. Back here.
Okay, this is probably, I don't think this is, well, it could be about reincarnation, but years ago, I heard a concept, and the term called walk-ins, people that come and they're from there, coming to watch us, and I don't know if it's to give back or what, but that has never left my mind. This was in a book group that I was in years ago.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that concept.
Yeah.
Is it a concept that's out there? Do we know of these people or these souls called walk-ins?
The idea here is that usually the way to get here is to be born. You got to go through 9 months of gestation and become, go through diapers and go through adolescence in order to be an adult. In some instances, we have some cases where it seems as if the personality of a person, a child or an adult, leaves, and a different personality is suddenly there. And these are sometimes called walk-ins. That there's kind of a deal where they switch, where someone voluntarily leaves their incarnation and someone voluntarily takes over the body so that they can be here without going through the whole gestational process. That's a complicated topic. Some people are skeptical about that interpretation of the walk-in phenomenon. Other people are more supportive of this idea that you can have a step-in or a walk-in. But the basic idea is that there's kind of an exchange taking place between spiritual beings and physical beings, or between embodied beings and disembodied beings. Because if what I'm saying is true, we already are spiritual beings, right? You don't become a spiritual being when you die. We are a spiritual being with our body. We are an embodied spiritual being, and then there are disembodied spiritual beings. So the normal cycle is what we've been talking about, but maybe there's some variations on that interaction.
So it is a phenomenon then. You said the walking phenomena, so it's that out there?
It is out there, and it is discussed, and it does come up in, it's kind of a minor thread, but it does come up in the discussions.
Thank you. I was just going to ask just kind of my final question on reincarnation. I've believed in it forever, and it has been popular in my church, so I've kept very quiet always to myself. But the question I've always had in my head was, when is it over? Are there completed souls so that you keep coming back, and you learn more and more and more? But are there, every once in a while, I know a person who dies that I think to myself, that must be a completed soul, but I'm not sure that that ever happens.
That's a large question. The classic way of thinking. See, we became self-conscious about 35,000 years ago as a species, right? And it's about 5,000 years ago that we began to develop the psychotechnology to explore the deep unconscious, to really explore the nature of mind itself. And we began meditating, and we began meditating about 4,000 years ago. And when we began meditating, we first began to push deep into the psyche. We discovered the Mother Universe. We discovered Brahman. We discovered the soul. We discovered this beautiful, beautiful spiritual reality which has gestated the physical world, the source of the Big Bang. And when we discovered it, our first reaction was, my God, this is magnificent, this is beautiful, this feels so good, this is home, this is where I want to be. I don't want to be in Myrtle Beach, even though I like golf. I don't want to be here. I want to be there. And so the religions that came into existence about 3,000 years ago are all variations on an up-and-out cosmology. So we want to achieve breakthrough, we want to go home. So we want to be good to achieve salvation so we can go home. We want to become enlightened so we can achieve moksha so we can go home. So it's all kind of up and out. And then so if it's an up and out, then you have to, what are the criteria? There must be some threshold that we must pass in order that we can get our ticket punched so we can get out of here. I understand all those systems. And by the way, there's Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, all of them, fundamentally, with a few variations among the most spiritually sophisticated elements, all of them are up-and-out cosmologies. The purpose is to get up and away. And that leaves a fundamental riddle unsolved. Why the physical universe? Remember these pictures we were showing before? Why the physical universe? Why did the divine, or whatever you want to think of as this, what was before the Big Bang, when everything was in that reality, why did that reality create the magnificent physical universe that we are part of? Up-and-out cosmologies leave that unexplained. It becomes a veil of tears, it becomes a challenge, it becomes an obstacle course, but it doesn't really explain what the divine was thinking when he created the physical universe. I think the up-and-out cosmologies are simply the first stage of human discovery. A more mature discovery takes place when we realize, when we wake up, when we begin to realize that we come from this reality, we are part of this reality, the physical world is an expression of this reality. The goal is not simply to return. The goal is to integrate that reality and this reality into conscious presence wherever we are. So the goal is to literally draw more of spiritual, the Mother Universe, into the Daughter Universe, of that reality into this reality, so that these worlds become more integrated. so that eventually heaven is a state of awareness. It's not a place. You can be in heaven on earth. You can be in heaven in the spiritual world. It's a state of awareness. It's not a place. Once we have a species which is able to have more conscious and continuous and unbroken rapport between spiritual reality and physical reality, then the evolutionary game changes and we move into a new direction. But we're going to be doing this for another billion years. We're going to be doing it for tens of billions of years, right? So I think when we die, we get to go home, we get to be renewed, we get to be rejuvenated, we return to source, all these wonderful things that we're about to look at happen. But the goal is not simply to get away from it all. The goal is to become more completely, a more magnificent manifestation of the creative process itself. So I'm distrustful of the criteria which have been established for up and out cosmologies. To me, that's just midway. And the most sophisticated spiritual traditions recognize that. But the Western thinker, who's actually a Hindu thinker, who really drove this point home and underscored this very powerfully in his teaching is Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo was very critical of the up and out cosmology, and he said, no, it's an incarnational theology. What we need is an incarnational presence, a greater incarnational presence. Okay? Near-death episode research. I bet if any of you have looked at the literature for any of the 4 areas we're talking about today, most of you have probably looked at some of the near-death episode literature. Isn't that a magnificent literature? I mean, the stories are just phenomenal. Here are my 3 favorite books for going into this literature. And I've taught this for years. And we all know Raymond Moody was the one who started it, and it got things going. But one of my great heroes here is a man named Ken Ring. He wrote his dissertation. He was at the University of Connecticut, a professor in the psychology department. He wrote his dissertation. His first book is called Life at Death. This is his second book, Heading Toward Omega. And his third book on it is Lessons from the Light. Heading Toward Omega is a little hard to find. It's out of print now. You have to do a little digging in the libraries. And Lessons from the Light is still available. It's still in print. Ken is, besides being just a deliciously sweet human being, he is he's one of the founders of Near-Death Episode, the Journal of Near-Death Episode Studies, of what was originally in thanatology. He's a good clinical clinician. He probably knows more about near-death episode research than any other single person alive today. He's got file cabinets and file cabinets of cases, and he lets the people speak for themselves. So, Chapter 3 in Heading Toward Omega, to me, is one of the most, if there's a person who's really suffering from death in their life and they've lost someone, I'll Xerox Chapter 3 of Heading Toward Omega and give it to them. It's 13 accounts of people who have unusually deep near-death episodes. And also in Lessons from the Light, you're going to get all sorts of research there. This is the last book he wrote. There's a chapter towards the end of it called Returning to the Source. And once again, he's distilled people's case histories, and he shares their case histories. There's also a chapter on near-death episodes of the blind, because we find that some people who have been blind from birth were blinded shortly after they were born. When they have a near-death episode, they can see. And that was a kind of an anecdote that we couldn't document, but Ken, he documented it. And so he presents the evidence for this. And he also documents the long-term changes in personality structure that happens to people who have unusually deep near-death episodes. So he's been part of this second generation of scholars. We're not interested simply that whether this happens. We now know it happens. We've got millions of people, about 35% of the people who nearly die have conscious recall of their experience.
What is an in-depth near-death experience?
He differentiates 5 stages of the near-death experience. And not everybody has the same depth of experience. I mean, some people may experience, the first stage is a feeling of peace. Then there may be a stage of separation from the physical body, the tunnel kind of phenomenon. We go on to the confrontation, the meeting of being of light. So people, for a variety of reasons, not everybody has the same deep experience. What Ken does in Heading Toward Omega is he hypothesizes this. He's asking the question not whether near-death episodes occur. He's already written a book on that. He knows that they occur. He's asking the question, what does it mean? What is the meaning of a near-death episode? And he hypothesizes that the most likely way to understand the meaning of this event is to study the people who have the deepest form of the experience. And he calls these core NDEers. They go right to the core. So it's not simply people who have separation from their body, going into another reality, meeting the light. The 5th stage is to go into the light, to actually merge with that light and to go deeply into it. This is what he calls a core NDE. And that's where I think, where people have the deepest homecoming experience, the deepest experience, and then they come back out of that experience. And those are the people who are often the most profoundly changed by that experience. And for the changes, he runs through lists of changes. They're not only changed by their values change, they lose all fear of death. That's one of the most widespread phenomena. They lose all fear of death. They become disinterested in material possessions. That whole consumer culture just kind of falls away. It's just silly. They become more compassionate. They become more spiritually attuned. But their physiology actually has changed. Sometimes they can't be around electrical appliances and computers, and they can't wear digital watches. Lights blow out around them. So there's something about going back to source, which seems to involve an immersion into a higher form of energy, which changes people physiologically as well as psychologically. Okay? So that he just very carefully lays them out layer by layer, and he documents all the phenomena that we're finding. He documents them piece by piece. Okay? Can I share the beauty of this is in the people's own experiences. So how about if I just read for you one of the cases that's in Ken's book.
Yes, please do. Yes.
This one is a case that comes from chapter 13 of Lessons from the Light. And do we have that?
Yes.
We do have that book in Marie.
We have such a great bookstore.
Isn't it? What's this guy here? It's just awesome. There's a woman named Virginia Rivers. All right, and I'm going to jump to the juicy part. And she has the usual, she separates from her body, and he explains why she's having this episode. And she's traveling through the tunnel, and she's blowing through the universe, and then she comes to the end of this journey, and she says galaxies are flying by her, the sensation. And she begins to receive knowledge. She says, quote, "The farther forward I was propelled, the more knowledge I received. My mind felt like a sponge, growing and expanding in size with each addition. The knowledge came in single words and in whole idea blocks. I just seemed to be able to understand everything, as if it were being soaked up or absorbed. I could feel my mind expanding and absorbing, and each new piece of information somehow seemed to belong. It was as if I had known already, but forgotten or mislaid it. as if it were waiting here for me to pick it up on my way back. You forget, you remember. She goes on, a melody man could not possibly have composed, yet so totally familiar and in complete harmony with the very core of my being, as if it were the rhythm of my existence, the reason for my being. And then she goes into the ecstatic state of great peace, great love. She says, love poured into me from all the corners of the universe. And she eventually arrives at her end destination. And what stands out for her, again, is the experience of knowledge. She says, all at once, there was total and absolute awareness. There was not a question I could ask for which I did not already have the answer. Can you imagine? That's like telling us the purpose of life is to get questions. Because when you're with God, you want to be, and you can have any answer to anything you wanted to know. What if you have just cheap, 2-bit questions? You want to have some good questions stored up. Imagine anything you wanted to know, you could know. I looked over to the presence. She's with this light presence I knew would be there, and thought, God, it was so simple. Why didn't I know that? And then she goes on, I'm skipping pieces. It was God, His love, His light, His very essence, the force of creation emanating to the ends of all eternity, reaching out as a pulsing beacon of love to bring me home. She puts home in quotation marks. He told me many things of which I have little or no recollection now. I remember only 2 things from all of that exchange. First, God told me that there were only 2 things we could bring back to it with us when we died: love and knowledge. So I was to learn as much about both as possible. Secondly, God told me I had to return. I could not stay. There was something I had yet to accomplish. I remember knowing at that moment what it was, but I have no recollection now. Here's a little bit of a paradox. 2 things we can bring back: love and knowledge. However, she's just made it very clear when she died, or she went into a state of absolute knowledge. So we return to absolute knowledge. But one of the things that God wants us to do is bring back knowledge. What could we possibly bring back that would equal the knowledge that's waiting for us when we die? You see that paradox? That's a paradox really only if we think that the purpose of life is to go home, is to return. That's not the purpose. What if the purpose is to bring more and more knowledge into time and space? So the knowledge that we discover here, we bring back, not to add to the knowledge that's there, but because we are integrating here the knowledge which is freely available there. The purpose is to bring more loving, more knowledge here, which we bring back, because we're sewing there and here into one being.
Well, it's hard to talk about this stuff and not feel like it's an up and out cosmology, because even the way you're talking right now talks about we're going out there to bring it back here.
Yeah.
When in fact, like a mandala,
Yeah.
isn't it flowing from and through us? I mean, we look into ourselves and it's like looking into an atom. We expand back out. It's all happening here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's very hard to talk about it without
Right.
lapsing into those old
Right.
habits.
So we don't really bring something back except in our memory, right? It's all where we have access to it right now.
Yes.
So when we talk about bringing it back, we're bringing it back into memory or into consciousness, right?
I think it's a both and.
Both ends.
I think it's a both and. I think that, I'll explain this. We don't really go anywhere when we die, but I mean, if we were to die right here, in some sense, we don't leave the room, but in another sense, we leave the room. So, it was a monk, Abraham of Santa Clara, an Augustinian monk in the 17th century, who said, he who dies before he dies does not die when he dies. Those who die before they die do not die when they die. What does he mean by that? If there's a sense in which there's physical death and then there's spiritual death. If we go through the spiritual death, which is to say we drop away the ego and we wake up to our deeper spiritual knowing, if we go through the death rebirth process, it actually changes what happens to us when we die. And it's more and more clear that we're really not going anywhere, we're just shifting our register, shifting the registration. So I think the key is we're bringing more and more of it here, we're changing the conditions, we're changing the conditions within which life takes place, but we're not really going anywhere. So in that sense, we're not going anywhere. Robert Monroe says in going out of his body, in the early stages, you kind of have a sensation that you're traveling, you're going out. But then later, that disappears. He says you just kind of think and you're there. So it's not that you're going somewhere where there is a physical distance to travel. You're really just, you're opening up to a depth of consciousness where that reality is here, right now. And I think that speaks to what you're saying. It is all here, it's all right now, but we just keep ourselves shielded from it in some way. So we're just taking down barriers of our mind.
It sounds like that shape, the torus. The
torus,
it
like a
goes
donut?
out and you expand out, but where you actually are is back in the center.
Yeah, we keep bringing it all back into the center. Yes, here and then here.
I lost my father, and the way that I understand that, or I think about that, and I think about him being with me still, is whenever a person walks out of a room, they leave behind. There's something, the essence or whatever, that they've left behind, that print, that imprint that they were there. And that's the way that I stay in touch with my dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that makes sense?
It does. And this maybe allows us to address something else. My father died about 45 years ago. Now, according to Stevenson's data, he or his soul is probably incarnated again. And so one of the questions my students ask me is, I really want to see my dad again. I want to see the ones I've loved. What if I die and get up to heaven and they're already incarnated? They're not there anymore.
They just left.
Just missed them. So, but actually, a couple of things help us understand this from a larger context. First of all, we don't incarnate all of our energy in every incarnation. The large majority of our soul's energy stays outside of time and space, even while part of it incarnates into time and space. So the way I would put it for your father and my father, that their soul, your father has now returned to his soul. So your father is now very much living a deeper life, a larger life, the life of the soul. Even if that soul has sent out a distillation of threads into and started a new incarnation, when you die, you meet your father's soul. And the face that your father's soul wears is the face that you are most familiar with. So it wears the face of your father. But you are not just you, right? You are beginning to be your soul. So it may, in the first stage, it may be like you meeting your father or me meeting my father. But very quickly, it's your soul reconnecting with his soul, and that's a bigger enterprise, a larger enterprise. So that your Father leaves a trace, all of our loved ones leave a trace in us and on the earth. But they are a living presence, they continue to be a living presence in this larger world that we encounter when we die. So, and we're going to see, Michael Newton is very clear, we only incarnate a fraction of our, at this present time, a fraction of our soul's energy. And we choose how much of our energy of the soul we incarnate into our present body. He says if we incarnated our entire soul in our present body, we'd blow all the circuits of our brain, we couldn't handle the energy. And that's why I think we picture great saints and sages like with this light coming off of them, because literally they are carrying more energy than an ordinary person. Yeah. Here, and then here.
I'm trying to wrap my brain around this, but it sounds like you're talking about a process where there is a God who, through this process of expansion and contraction, is actually making the souls all more like God. It's like this expansion, a bigger expansion and contraction that's kind of, so that we do bring heaven on earth in a new realm or a new place or whatever, and then would go from there.
Yeah. We're going to see when we get a little bit further along, Michael Newton, if you ask, where does the soul come from? Where do souls come from? And the answer seems to be the soul is actually kind of teased out of God. The soul it's like the sun's throwing out solar flares, and the soul is kind of, the essence of the divine is teased out, and it's actually incubated very carefully. There are beings whose sole job it is to catch and nourish that energy and to birth it, help it birth into self-awareness. It starts with the divine, but it's birthed as an individual self-awareness. But it's pure potential, it's unactualized potential. And then the system seems to be set up so that that self-awareness begins a journey of self-actualization. So it has all the potential of the divine, but it's kind of like in potentio, not in actualization. And it's actualized more and more. And it's almost as if this isn't quite the right image, but it's kind of like God is cloning herself. I mean, God is just throwing out stars, and each one of us is that, the ancient Greek theologians called it logos spermaticos. You know, the seeds of the logos, the seeds of the divine. And we're incubating that seed potential into deeper and deeper actualizations. Sooner or later, we develop enough that we remember who we are. We remember that our essence is the divine, and the essence of everything and every person we see around us is also of the divine. Holy smokes, we're all part of the divine. We're all differentiating and becoming more and more, and it's all taking place inside the divine. So the classic phrase is, from God to God, always in God. So we come from God, we go back to God. Where are we now? We're in God. We never leave, we never left, except in our lack of understanding. So we are becoming more and more, in some sense, what we were in the beginning, but not exactly, because we haven't actualized it yet. We haven't brought it into full conscious expression. And there's one other last thing I want to mention is that I'm going to get to Newton soon. We'll probably do that after lunch. But Newton's people very clearly suggest that the God of this universe is not necessarily the ultimate God. They talk about God's grandfather. This system, this entire physical universe, which we measure in light years, which is 6 million miles is 1 light year. We measure the universe in a yardstick of 6 million miles, and it's thousands, millions of light years across, billions of light years across. this entire universe is not the only universe. There are other universes, there are many universes, and there is kind of a being who is the generator and responsible for each universe. And none of those beings are the ultimate being. Okay? Well, that'll fry your brain. Yeah. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but when people remember what they were doing before they were born, they experience divine presence, like people who have near-death episodes, but they don't draw the conclusion, they don't use the concept of God to describe it. Their vision is that the concept of God that we are born with, that we kind of work with in our churches, is so inadequate to describe the reality that they don't want to use that language to describe the reality that they're confronting. And that this reality, which is magnificent beyond measure, as we saw from Virginia's experience, that reality is not necessarily the end reality. It's just the magnificent reality, this the generative intelligence of this system. So all of a sudden we kind of, whoa, we're in a bigger universe than we even imagined. The question is, are we safe? What's going on? Are we part of an intelligent, meaningful exercise, or are we lost on this chaos? And I think we're getting more clearly the awareness that we are safe, first of all. There's nothing that can ever happen to us that will truly end our life, extinguish life. We're not, hell, by the way, this disappears out of the system. The concept of hell is primitive beyond measure. We're doing something that's creative and immensely satisfying in the long term. It may hurt and pinch in the short term, but it's taking us, if we're going someplace, we're going into a developmental process that's just profoundly satisfying at its heart. And I think that's more important for us and to know the ultimate, is to believe that this is a meaningful, worthwhile exercise that we're part of. Here and then back here.
Could that be why we come back with knowledge, so that we start at a higher level than we left, or at not starting all the way at the beginning again?
Yeah.
So we come back with this knowledge so that we can go further, or perhaps bring back our knowledge with others?
Yeah, I think so. And as long as we keep a flexible vision, like in college, we may have a student who decides to major in math and takes mathematics courses for several semesters, develops a good ability in math, and then says, well, I think I'm going to drop that, and I'm going to start being an artist. I'm going to try art for a while. Now, they may be a beginner artist, but that doesn't mean they're a beginner student. They're just beginning a new set of skills. So you really can never, it's always a mistake to think that any level of proficiency in one set of skills is a reliable barometer of the measure of the soul that you're dealing with. Because somebody can look like a beginner when they're not a beginner at the soul level, they're just a beginner in a particular discipline. Right? If this is your first time to learn whatever, you'll look like a beginner, but you may not be a beginner. Sooner or later, all of those skills, I think, will be integrated into one conscious presence. But the whole system is that we work in stages. We're working in stages, just one bit at a time. Last question before I'm going to read you one more near-death episode. There was a question here. Somebody had their hand up? Yeah.
It's part of our development. I've noticed that if you read books, like I like to read old books, like from the 40s and 50s, and even before, about what you're talking about now. I remember there was a book called The Unobstructed Universe, and I think it was done in the 40s or 50s, and it was so hard to understand. I mean, I knew there were like little glimmers really good stuff in there, but it was so, the person expressing it, it was so hard, they had such trouble expressing it in writing, it was so hard to understand. But now, like the way you express things, it's just like in those few years, the ability to even express it has gone by leaps and bounds.
Yeah. And I think the more people understand a particular idea, it actually, the collective psyche is also understanding that idea, and when enough people understand the idea, then it makes it easier for the next human being to understand that idea. So it gets easier and easier. And people who do past lives therapy, like Winifred Lucas told me, when they were first doing hypnotic regression and past life therapy, you had to take people into very, very deep stages of trance before you could get to the level where they could remember their previous lives. But over the following years and decades, they found that they didn't have to go so deep. It was like it was getting easier and easier to access those memories. Now, from morphic field theory, from Rupert Sheldrake's vision, the more people acquire a particular capacity, they not only acquire it as an individual, but the species is acquiring it. So if remembering our former lives is a capacity, the first people who remembered their previous lives, they may have to go very, very hard, go very, very deep, but it gets easier. The more people do it, the easier it gets. So always, we are always standing on the shoulders of the men and women who went before. And we are then becoming the shoulders that our children and grandchildren will stand on. And isn't it exciting to think about the airplane? Unity 200 years from now?
But when you think about it, they will be us.
Right.
Yes, we will be our own
So we're not doing this
grandchildren. Yeah. Then that twisted up. Let me read you one more near-death episode here before we leave it. These things are just so beautiful. This comes from Heading Toward Omega. And it's the experience of a woman named Carol Parrish Hanna. Carol. And she, I'm going to skip the early part, she's traveling through the universe, the tunnel of light, and da-da-da. And then she gets to the culmination part. She says, by my side, there was a being with a magnificent presence. I could not see an exact form, but instead, a radiation of light that lit up everything about me and spoke with a voice that held the deepest tenderness one can ever imagine. As this loving yet powerful being spoke to me, I understood vast meanings, much beyond my ability to explain. I understood life and death. And instantly, any fear I had ended. There was a totality, a completeness in the realization that I could continue to experience and that there was absolutely no reason to continue my frantic struggle to exist. For what seemed to be endless time, I experienced this presence, this light being, pure, powerful, all-expansive, was without a form, and it could be said that great waves of awareness flowed into me and into my mind. As I responded to these revelations, I knew them to be so. Of course, it didn't matter if one lived or died. It was also clear. There was a complete trust and greater understanding of what these words meant. It seemed whole truths revealed themselves to me, ways of thought, ideas greater and purer than I have ever tried to figure out came to me. Thoughts, clear and without effort, revealed themselves in total wholeness, although not in logical sequence. I, of course, being in that magnificent presence, understood it all. I realized that consciousness is life. We will live in and through much, but this consciousness we know that is behind our personality will continue. I knew that the purpose of life does not depend on me. It has its own purpose. I realize that the flow of it will continue even as I will continue. New serenity entered my being. As this occurred, an intensity of feeling rushed through me, as if the light that surrounded that being was bathing me, penetrating every part of me. As I absorbed the energy, I sensed what I can only describe as bliss. That is such a little word, but the feeling was dynamic, rolling, magnificent, expanding, ecstatic, bliss. It whirled through me, around me, and entering my chest, flowed through me, and I was immersed in love and awareness for ineffable time.
Beautiful. That's the kind of thing we can read to our beloveds when they're in their passing time. It's so, what a gift.
To be afraid of dying is to have everything turned upside down. Dying, I tell my kids all the time, it's a great life. And at the end, you get to die. Birth. There are some cultures that mourn birth. You know, because birth is when the work begins. Birth is when you begin class, the session has begun. Dying is returning home. Dying is graduation. Dying is recess. It's coming in. You know, joy.
I usually don't share this, and certainly didn't 30 years ago, if you would understand this. But 30 years ago, I almost died, and I had the near-death experience, and I went through those stages of calm and everything, and I went up to the ceiling, looking down at my body, which was in so much pain, everybody working on me down there, you know, and the calm and the everything that was there, and the light was behind me. I didn't get to go through the light, and I remember, and I felt bad about it ever since. I was so, and I had 2 small children. There's certainly a reason for me to stay on this earth, but what I was feeling at that time was so wonderful, and the light was behind me. I wasn't going toward the light, but it was pulling me. And all of a sudden, bam, I was right back in my body with all of that pain and everything. I was so angry. I felt bad ever since about that. Because I certainly came back with a whole new concept and even energy, spiritual, you know, but still I remember I was ready to go. I mean, it was
Even with children there, even with all our attachments.
It never entered my mind when I was there, though. It wasn't like, oh, I have a responsibility, I need to go back. There was nothing of that. It was like complete serenity, complete bliss. And I was going home. And then all of a sudden, I was back in that body. That's the first thing I remember, just being, because I had been in shock, and I just remember being angry that I was there.
And other people would have shared that experience, just because people, when they come back, sometimes they're angry. They get angry at the doctors. Why did you bring me back? And it takes them a long time, sometimes, to adjust to life back on Earth, because once you touch infinity, I mean, really, who wants to be in Youngstown? Here's the thing. Before you were born, you were in that ecstatic space. You were in ecstasy. You were in the light. You were with the divine. You were in your soul. All the joy that pulls you so instinctively there, you were there. And then you made a series of choices where you voluntarily left it in order to come here.
And that's why babies cry.
There must have been some great purpose for you to come here. To leave that joy, there must be great purpose that draws us to here. And some mystics, Juliana of Norwich, you know, she's a 16th century, I think, Catholic saint. wonderful woman. She had a vision on her deathbed. She had a near-death experience, and she spent the rest of her life meditating on this vision. And she unpacked it in this book that eventually called Revelations of Love, Divine Love. And she says she rejected the concept of original sin. She said that's just not true. God is not angry at us, and we're not sinful, and we're not bad. She says God asks us to come. And God knew we were going to, it's like you send out your beloved son on a journey, or your daughter, and they fall into a ditch and they get stuck in the bottom of the ditch and they can't get out. And God knew we were going to get stuck. We knew we were going to forget. We knew we were going to get stupid. We knew we were going to, the malls were going to be our favorite places to go. But we loved God so much, we went where she asked us to go. And when we die, we remember why. When we die, we touch back into the foundation, and we are restored. We debrief, but then sooner or later, it's time to come into it again. It's time to grow, because we're constantly learning and expanding and becoming more. And the reason we're learning and expanding and becoming more is because our nature is God, and this is what God is doing. This is part of the fabric of existence. Yes?
It's amazing to me that we can have these experiences. I had a near-death experience years ago. It did change my life. What's so amazing to me is that we can have these miraculous experiences. And I've also had experiences in meditation that are very similar to some of these. So you have these miracles, and then 2 days later you're pissed off in a traffic jam. I mean, no wonder we forget whole lifetimes. I'm just amazed that you can have this miraculous understanding and know that there's nothing to be afraid of, and then run home and lock your doors.
That's that stupid thing he was talking about.
Yeah. Time and space is tricky, isn't it? I mean, it's really, they're so dense here. It's incredibly dense, and it kind of, the veil comes down, and we feel like we're trapped again. We're involved in things, and a weightlifter becomes strong by putting more weight on the bar. The weightlifter doesn't complain about the weight in the bar, because the weight is what allows them to develop the muscles. Time and space is the weight on the bar. It's allowing us to develop muscles faster than we would develop if we stayed in heaven. So, but it's hard. It's hard being here. It's tricky being here. There's more ways to we feel like there's more ways to go wrong than there are to go right. It's challenging to go here. Thank God for unity. Thank God there's a place where people can go and put these pieces together and find their way back to this deep sanity, which allows them to live not only with a measure of dignity, but with enthusiasm, to actually consciously embrace the challenge of being human, instead of feeling like you're being punished or you're exiled or all this nonsense. We're exiled from paradise. No, I mean, you can understand where that came from, but no, that's just not right. I mean, it's like God is right here. God wouldn't send us here. The goddess wouldn't send us here without giving us all the means available to make it work. Now, it's time to take a break for lunch.
But first,
Wait.
before we go downstairs for this incredible lunch that Miss Charlene has put together for us, some of you are clamoring for us to receive the donation. And if you're making